Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board meeting, Tuesday the 14th of December, February even, I'm just testing here, February. Any apologies? Lucy?
Wait, Mike Carr.
Mike Carr, any others?
Chair, I've got apologies from Matthew Holmes and Councillor Wilson. Thank
you, Stephen. Late items. We got the addendum, didn't we, for the community managed libraries, so that's under item 13. Hopefully you've all got copies of that, but I've got no other late items. Nobody else has. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, please? None. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February. They've been attached. Lucy?
I wasn't able to find any confidential minutes for this meeting. And I just thought that there ought to be some confidential minutes that came back to the confidential part of this meeting. I just wondered if we could have a clarity as to whether that would be happening at some point in the future.
They'll be written on rice paper and they'll dissolve after 10 seconds. Okay. No, seriously, Stephen, can you help on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I can look at, there will be a closed set of minutes that exist, so I can look at circulating those outside of the meeting. I'll look at some way of doing that. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, if there's nothing else on minutes, you've got item 5, forward plan. That's also attached. Lucy?
As I mentioned before, there were some items on the forward plan which we could have anticipated needing to go on before they were decided, such as the update on the library situation, which, because the report back from that was agreed as an action probably 2 years ago. So it could have been on the forward plan a long time ago, but it actually appears just in time to be decided. And I think that's poor practice.
Okay, we'll note your concerns, Lucy, and Stephen, we can pass those on, please. Any other issues with regard to the forward plan? If not, item 6, Council Cabinet. Starting off on Council Cabinet, the first one to look at, well, the recommendation of the Scrutiny Board. Okay. Item 8, determine school admission arrangements for Derby City, maintain and voluntary controlled schools. Gamal, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll draw out headline points here. The Council is responsible for its maintained and voluntary controlled schools within Derby, and this report sets out the proposed admission arrangements for 24-25, Chair, and these are aligned with the school admissions code of practice. So, Chair, in terms of the consultation period has taken place between October 2022 and November 2022, no objections were received. The admissions criteria outlined in the report is consistent with the admissions code, and there are no changes from previous years. Just one minor change, Chair, at 4.6, where Portway Infant School have asked to reduce their admission limit to 60 to better reflect the current numbers coming through, which is fine, and that still ensures that there are sufficient primary school places, Chair. So in terms of the recommendation outlined in the report, is for Cabinet to approve the proposed admissions arrangements for community and voluntary control infant junior primary school, Chair, and publish the numbers outlined in Appendix 3. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gamal. Alison.
Thank you very much. Last year, about a year ago, perhaps slightly longer, we had a report where the numbers attending Landau Forte were planned to increase. And I raised then the issue of the travel plan coming early on in this process of deciding when which schools should expand and where it's realistic for them to do so. That was a recommendation taken to Cabinet, but it was rejected by the Cabinet member because it was said the travel plan comes at the planning application stage. So I was just wondering what consideration has been given to these proposals, given that the proposals relate to, for St Benedict, maybe another 90 odd or plus pupils per year for the next 2 years. But there we have a similar situation to Landau, only perhaps arguably even worse, where there's already traffic chaos outside that school every day. Thank you.
Yeah, the issue of St Benedict's will be discussed at the next item, item 9, but with regard to Landau 40 and Councillor Martin's concerns, any comments, Gamal? Can you take us on board, please?
Chair, I'll pick that up in the St Benedict's report. That's okay. This is to do with primary admissions. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of this report, what this report sets out, of course, the Council has a legal duty to ensure sufficient secondary school places. 1.2 in the report outlines that the Department for Education approached the Council and requested that rather than doing permanent expansions, they were wanting the authority to take forward temporary admission number increases for bulge year groups across a number of schools. So last year, we had detailed discussions, real partnership discussions with a number of they're all secondary schools to ask them to consider what the DfE had requested and to have a look at temporary increases to ensure there were sufficient secondary school places. A feasibility study was completed by the Ralph Sherwin Trust, Academy Trust. Other schools also came back with additional secondary school places as well in terms of smaller increases. And Chair, in terms of the main detail outlined in the table at 4.7 shows the proposed 127 additional secondary school places, small numbers across a number of schools, which is really helpful. And St Benedict's came back with an increase of 90 places over 2 years. So 90 in September 23 and 90 in September 2024. And these 127 will ensure additional places. At 4.5, it outlines that the original proposal was Landau Forte, but the DfE requested following changes in terms of good Ofsted inspections in schools in Derby and wanting to do bulge year groups, they requested the council to open dialogue with schools in that basis. So the original Landau Forte project was paused as requested by the department, and then we had ongoing discussions in relation to those expansions. What this report outlines is the feasibility study for St Benedict's has been done. That's the school that needs capital works because the numbers are significant, and therefore the report sets out a proposal to consider allocating 6.1 million capital funding for the additional 180 places. Chair, for information at 4.13, we've been in detailed discussions with St Benedict's and the DfE because St Benedict's has been included in the DfE's National School Rebuilding Programme, but the timescales of that are still evolving. But the department were comfortable and the trust that actually it's likely to be after this scheme has completed, and therefore they were comfortable with taking this project forward. So in terms of overall improvements to building and traffic, I think those sorts of factors will be considered as part of the National Rebuilding Scheme. But of course, Chair, details aren't available on that in terms of size, scale, and what sort of infrastructure works would be possible in terms of travel and traffic. In terms of recommendations in this report, they are outlined there in terms of 2.1 to 2.3, primarily around allocation of funding that's allocated to the council for additional school places, and St Benedict's Trust taking that forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to raise an issue that I made mention at our pre-meeting briefing, and that is some concern that at St Benedict's we're looking at another 180 places, and we've got the St Mary's School, which is being rebuilt following the fire. There's already a issue and problem for local people because children come from all over the city, and many parents bring them in cars, and there is absolute gridlock on a morning, and that's why it's urgent. I know the meeting took place with the Broadway Action Group, I think it was yesterday, with various officers of the council and the school, and they're asking for further meetings to try and get the travel plan sorted out and trying to work with the school in a positive way wherever possible to try to reduce the dependency for car usage in this particular area. So that hopefully, because that's the right thing to do for the kids, that's the right thing to do for the area, that's the right thing to do for the environment. So hopefully we'll be taking that seriously and take us on board, Gamal. Okay, Gamal's nodding on that, so that's good. Alison.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just if I may, Gamal, because obviously that this is the point of my question, and I know you've sort of answered it, but in a sense, you seem to be suggesting that for the purposes of this temporary increase, nothing will be done. Is that correct, or is there something that can be done? Because whilst it is temporary, that's an awful, that's a lot of potential extra cars going to that area, as Councillor Repton has explained, that we're both ward councillors for that area. It is chaotic. Everybody knows it's along the A6. Not just about Darley Ward, it's about the through traffic through the city. So is there anything in the pipeline for helping with that thing?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we know it's enormously difficult, and the same discussions at Landau in terms of pinch points during the start and the end of the school day. So we will be working with the school in terms of updating its travel plan, and as the scheme will go through planning permission, there may be conditions attached in relation to that, Chair. So certainly as part of this scheme, the feasibility doesn't include significant infrastructure works as far as the access and traffic is concerned, but certainly travel plans will be updated. And Chair, of course, St Benedict's has a wider area, but they also have a lot of buses that come through. So travel plan will be looked at and revisited as part of this scheme by the Trust, as well as the future scheme, Chair.
Thank you. And thanks for colleagues raising the issue of transport, because it was on my mind as well. There's three other things I wanted to raise. One is I'm presuming that this new block would remain as part of the rebuilding scheme, so it would be effectively saving the Department for Education some funding in the future for doing the rebuild programme. And I just wondered if there was any likelihood of there being some recompense acknowledgement of that either now or in the future, given our financial situation. There's the £6 million that this is costing. Is that part of the unallocated, I think about 9 million that was in the budget? Is that going through? And it might have been that I didn't read the later papers sufficiently. And finally, I just wanted to comment on the climate change implications, and I do like the way we're getting these sort of views in the reports now. But as this is an additional building, at least for the first couple of years, or probably actually for the next 7-10 years, unless it's making a lot of electricity on its roof, I don't see that there's a net green. There's actually, the building is going to use power as well as potentially generate power. So I think the higher efficiency of the building won't actually come into play until we've demolished some of the older bits, and there will be implications of that which isn't included in this report. Thank you.
Gamal?
Thank you. Picking up the first point in terms of any recompense from the DFE, no, that's unlikely, because it's really good news that St Benedict's has been included in the National Rebuilding Scheme, because some of the temporary accommodations there are in excess of 20, 30, 40 years and close to being life expired already, if not. So it's really good news that significant investment will be coming at St Benedict's. In terms of the £6 million capital, that is money that is allocated to Derby City Council following kind of information we provide on increasing secondary numbers, which is based on 3, 4, 5 years ago. That's what allocates the funding. So this money, £6 million, is directly to provide additional secondary school places, as we secured from the DFE. In terms of climate change and additional buildings, yes, I think an overall sustainability assessment will need to be done, but it will need to be done in the grand scheme once this scheme has been completed, as well as hopefully significant investment for St Benedict's with some very dated building and needing to have infrastructure and mechanical and electrical changes as well.
Thank you, Gamal. Okay, moving on to the next item. I think this is yours as well. And that is item number 11. Let me get those on the turn. No, it's not yours, sorry. No, item number 11. It's the... Sorry, it is item 10. That's post 16 to 19 home to school travel assistance consultation outcome. Gamal.
Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to the post-16 home to school travel assistant consultation that was completed. That consultation took place between 30th of September 2022 and 11th of December 2022. That consultation outlined a proposal of moving away from providing taxi transport for sixth form pupils post-16, but providing a personal travel budget and also improving the independent travel training service so that young people become more independent travellers. Appendix 2 sets out the detailed summary of the consultation responses. 4.4 is an important point in the report. The Council remains totally committed to providing discretionary travel assistance for eligible sixth form learners, whilst recognising there are opportunities to align with other local authorities who have done something similar in terms of discretionary travel and to help young people become more confident, independent travellers to achieve their full potential. Of course, this also links to the Council's medium-term financial plan and financial plan challenges for us as a council. The wide-ranging consultation process took place with a number of meetings inviting comments from young people as well as parents and families. The table at 4.7 outlines the proposal of moving away from taxi transport but providing personal budgets to families and in order to arrange travel, and those mileage distances are based on and rates based on what other councils near to Derby have done. Background information is at 4.9 is that there has been a significant increase in number of eligible people over the last few years, and expenditure has increased significantly. But equally importantly, it is important to enrich the independent travel training offer as well. The consultation response sets out the details. Important to note 4.13, the majority of responses are not supportive of this change and focus on concerns that young people may experience challenges around travelling independently to school and personal travel budgets may not suit everyone. The Council recognises that and understands there will be some exceptional cases, and therefore exceptions criteria has been updated. So, for example, where young people have significant medical needs, where they must travel with specialist professional support and medical equipment, then of course they would be eligible for a different type of transport. Young people engagement was positive. Young people were certainly more positive in terms of that preparation for adulthood. So in summary, the responses received from parents raised concerns and indicated they do not support the proposed changes. Conversely, young people felt that independent travel training and personal budgets did offer advantages. So in terms of the recommendations being presented to Cabinet tomorrow, from 2.1 to 2.3, primarily outline a process to move towards a personal travel budget. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Gamal. Any questions at all, Lucy?
Thank you for that. And I'll start with the things I think are really positive, which is, for example, the training, the travel training, which I think we've been doing for a number of years, but the raising of the profile of that I think is really helpful. The giving the flexibility to enable people to change the way they travel, which might be convenient for their family, I think is a good thing. But the tenor of this paper and the tenor of the consultation wasn't really an opening up of opportunities. It was a withdrawing of a service. And I feel really sad that that's the sort of underlying interpretation that it's very easy to take from this paper. There clearly are exceptional cases, and how that is interpreted, I think, will be very key to the way that this works. I think it's also helpful that there's recognition that there may be grants or bursaries or, in some cases, additional benefits that families can apply for. But quite a lot of these families have not just the children with special needs, but also parents who would also have additional needs of one sort or another, and therefore may not find it easy to be able to make the right approaches to the right people to obtain that additional potential for funding. The third point is, if you are receiving some funding, which you're going to use as a taxi, for a taxi, at present, a lot of children are travelling 2 or 3, maybe even 4 occasionally, in a taxi to a location, which should be saving funds. And as the council is organising that transport, it's easier for it to make those, see those similar journeys and make the connections. When people are doing that individually, with all the GDPR restrictions, it's going to be very difficult for parents to find other young people who need to travel, or for young people themselves to find a child who is in a different year at the school who may wish to be able to do a similar journey. And I think there needs to be some way of facilitating that. So Chair, I've got 2 things that I would put to committee to see if we are happy, other people are happy to support. The first one, Chair, is to ask Cabinet to provide support for parents to apply for bursaries, grants and additional benefits for themselves or their post-16 SEND children. And the second is to ask Cabinet to explore ways to enable parents and young people wishing to access personal travel budgets to share travel in ways that are compliant with GDPR considerations. But can we take them one at a time? Yeah. So the first one is to provide support to parents to apply for the bursaries, grants and additional benefits for themselves or their post-16 SEND children. I would like a seconder. Will you second me, Chair? Will you second it?
Well, rather than, I think it's been thought that I try and bring in members of the committee to get their views.
And the second one is to ask Cabinet to explore ways to enable parents, young people wishing to access personal travel budgets to share travel in ways that are compliant with GDPR considerations. So that could be sharing a taxi, or it might be one parent picking up their own child and somebody else. But to enable those sorts of arrangements to happen despite GDPR considerations.
Are you suggesting trying to work around
I think there needs to be somebody central to be able to coordinate that. So the council could say, you know, is anybody travelling from Derby to this distant school? Yeah. Would you be prepared to take an additional child in your car? A parent can't do that.
I think members are looking at a little bit as it might be. John's come in.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's going to create another monster really for the council to deal with, and we're struggling as it is. So, but I appreciate the sentiment, but whether the council can facilitate that, I think it's a stretch.
Chair, that's why I only said for Cabinet to explore, because it may not be practical, but it's something I think they ought to consider.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, thank you. Yeah, we have had this several times at CUIP, and I think, contrary to what Lucy said, I think if we made out this was a positive, this would be disingenuous, really. It is what it is. It's a cut, and I think if we had a fully, properly funded council, we wouldn't even be discussing this. But there are some positives. I think the young person's response to the consultation was positive. There are, you know, some issues around independence, which is great, and training, travel training. And the information from the Derby Send Alliance suggests to me, at least, that the budgets will probably stretch to cover the cost. So, you know, with regret, I'm accepting this is something we're going to have to live with.
Yeah, I share those concerns, John, which seem to be driven by finance, because there will be young people who are pretty disabled. It can be a variety of disabilities. It can be autistic spectrum disorder. It can be other issues where even with a personal budget, those families and those children will find it difficult to access the education they actually need. And it says in 3.1 that the local authority must exercise its discretionary power reasonably. Now, for me, if I was a judge, I'd be saying, is it reasonable to deny all families, all children, access to a taxi if it was absolutely necessary? And I think that's really regrettable, because there will be children and families in this city who will be sleeping uneasily in their beds with these proposals, who could be those people who shouldn't be disadvantaged, will be the ones that are disadvantaged, and even more so by not being able to access that education because of these. I can understand that for a number, yes, where you can encourage independence as an ex-social worker, I completely support that, and we should be doing that. But in terms of exercising its discretion power reasonably, I'm not convinced on that. And so I do regret that it will be a blanket no to all children, all families. Okay, are there any more comments? If not, thank you. Derby Football Hub. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to outline an update on the Derby Football Hub and seek approval to proceed. Derby Football Hub is part of a national programme, the Hubs programme, which aims to create sustainable facilities with multiple artificial grass pitches capable of generating surpluses for local reinvestment and less reliance on public sector. It is partially funded by Sport England, the FA and the Premier League. The Derby Football Hub project aims to use the investment to regenerate an area and an underused community asset. It aims to redevelop the site into a thriving state-of-the-art football facility, as well as a community asset to support the growth of football and active lives both locally and across the county. We will be aiming to develop 3 new artificial grass pitches and refurbish the existing one to total 4. We were seeking to redevelop and extend the existing building to include a cafe, flexible spaces for the delivery of education programmes and community programmes, and improve the on-site car parking capacity and access with the traffic flows in and around the area at peak times, especially on Sundays. And this will also seek to develop and transform the wider site into a more improved accessible community space, including replacing things like the play area and significantly enhanced ecological and biodiversity features developed on site. So we've changed the perception of this site from a closely cut playing fields to more akin to a park, and it's more aesthetically pleasing. The proposed route for operating the facilities to lease the facilities to the National Football Trust. The National Football Trust currently has a lease on 20 of 25 of the football hubs nationally, and they are operated by their operating subsidiary Leisure United. Leisure United operate the facilities, and operating surpluses from those facilities are ring-fenced and held by the National Football Trust as a restricted fund for application only within the local authority area. Therefore, any income over and above the operating cost of the facility are ring-fenced to be reinvested back into Derby to meet the aims and objectives of the National Football Trust charity. This report is seeking approval to progress with the Football Hub project at the racecourse to deliver high-quality facilities and support the meeting demands of local football and associated sports and activities within the community. To approve the addition of £11.9 million onto the capital programme for 23-24, and to approve the granting of the lease to the National Football Trust for a 25-year period. Out of that £11.9 million, we have a grant offer from the Football Foundation of £12 million. Sorry, £6 million, sorry. In addition to that, we are mindful around the impact of a potential new development, and we're also mindful around the installation of artificial grass pitches in replacing existing grass pitches. So therefore, we have been really considered in terms of our approach to thinking about the climate impact on this, recognising the cycle, the life cycle and the recycling of the artificial grass pitches is a key component of the construction. And actually there are framework consultants that we are working with to ensure that all the the infill mitigation or the base layer is recycled material, and also that upon recycling of the pitches at the end of their life, they also are recycled. Measures are being put into a new extension with low carbon options fitted into the construction and both the operation elements, and we are also assessing the decarbonation solutions for the existing building as well. There's significant improvements for both the ecological and biodiversity features on site, including a significantly improved and diverse planting scheme across the entire site, as well as a grounds maintenance management plan to ensure that we just don't have closely cut grass, but we also have pockets of longer grass that will ensure we've got greater biodiversity and habitat on site. Traffic and transportation, the infrastructure is being put in for EV charge points on the site. Through the proposed operator, the national operator Leisure United is working with a national operator to look at the installation of EV charge points on both Derby Football Hub and the national portfolio of the sites that they manage. We're seeking to improve the transport infrastructure to ensure that the current challenges and barriers that there are at this moment in time, especially on a Sunday around the racecourse on a because of the football activity, is significantly reduced, so there's less idling and better traffic flows. And we're also looking at how we assess the impact of those measures that we are putting in place through the climate change impact assessment tool throughout the life cycle of the project, and the biodiversity calculation tool to look at the impact that we're having in terms of habitat creation. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Many thanks. Any questions at all on that? Lucy?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the way you've used the climate impact tool. It sounds as though it's really made really influenced the way you've worked both here and also with potential suppliers. And that's obviously a way in which the council can influence things further afield. The two questions, one was floodlighting, and obviously that has an impact on wildlife as well. It's something that will come to planning in due course, but I just wondered what consideration you'd been given to it already. Secondly, what is the Future Investment Fund, which is providing some of the funding, and how is the use going to be restricted? Is this space going to be able to be used as a sort of general kick around when it's not being used for more formal matches?
Great.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'll take the first one. In terms of the floodlighting, so floodlight impact assessment has taken place and the impact that would have on the surrounding area. Planning has been approved and granted for that. On the scheme that's been proposed, so there are no real concerns in terms of that, and also the specification of the lighting is as such now is quite advanced in terms of trying to mitigate any impact that would have on wildlife in the surrounding area. In the second point around future reinvestment, so the reinvestment is around the income that's generated from the facility, so anything above the operating costs, that is ring-fenced to be spent into Derby City in terms of local authority boundary, and there's a local advisory group that will be established throughout the period of the facility opening, and that advisory group, of which the City Council will be a member of, will determine how that reinvestment will be spent, and that can be spent on supporting wider football provision across the city or other physical activity opportunities to look at maybe marginalised communities or underrepresented groups that aren't currently participating in physical activity or sport. And in terms of the third point, in terms of access, clearly this is going to be a great facility for formal football, but that's the easy bit. This opportunity in this facility is around creating a facility that is open and it's accessible, so there is free to use, and there's a multitude of different programs that happen both within the four walls of the facility but on the wider site as well. So it's not just for footballers and the dog walkers that use the site now, it's to open up the physical activity and sport opportunities for a whole range of different groups, especially those underrepresented ones.
Thanks very much, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's probably in there, but I've not found it yet. I'm assuming these pitches are going to be 4G, pretty much the best we can get at this point, because we need them to last for a long time, don't we? And obviously, the better the pitch, the more they'll get used, and that's what we're after. Is that fair to say?
I think we're getting a few positive nods, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the standard is 3G pictures, yes, and built into the business plan there is a sinking fund. So the sinking fund will replace those every 10 to 15 years, depending on where. But there's a significant maintenance regime as well that makes them last a lot longer as well.
Right, thanks very much for that one. Moving on to item 12, Derby and Derbyshire Mineral Local Plan. Hopefully this won't take too long unless we've discovered gold and oil I'm not aware of within the city boundaries, and if so, I want to share in it. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As a unitary authority, Derby City Council is the minerals planning authority for the city of Derby, and so is required to produce a minerals local plan. And to do that as efficiently as we can, we're working with Derbyshire County Council to produce a joint local plan. The County Council, for the obvious reasons, Chair, are the sort of dominant or lead party in preparing this. The plan, when it's adopted, will replace the existing adopted minerals plan, which was adopted in 2000, so that is getting a little bit long in the tooth. The current plan will cover a plan period to 2038 and will be used to assess applications for mineral development. It is important to say at the outset, Chair, that there are no active or proposed mineral sites within the city of Derby. However, being party to this joint plan allows us to demonstrate that we have considered the city and that it gives us a framework should anything else arise in terms of planning applications and so forth. So it's certainly worth having it. The minerals industry is extremely important to the rest of the county, though. I think I'm right in saying, Chair, that after Toyota and Rolls-Royce, it's the third largest industry within the county as a whole. There's been a lot of consultation over probably about the last 10 years in terms of drawing up the various proposals and policies for this plan. That culminated in a consultation on a draft plan about this time last year. There were some 3,500 responses to that consultation, but nearly 3,000 of those 3,500 were basically the same points made in a similar format but in individual letters. They were mainly seeking to strengthen the approach to addressing climate change, dealing with fossil fuels and fracking. The consultation responses are summarised in paragraph 4.8 of the report. There is a joint advisory committee which Councillor Carr sits on, which is made up of councillors from both local authorities. This gives a political steer to the plan making process. It's reviewed the issues and has resolved to support and to advise Cabinet that it supports the proposed changes. There are a number of changes arising from the last year's consultation. These, as I say, these mainly deal with the issues raised of climate change, coal, hydrocarbons and fracking, and these are set out in more detail in paragraph 4.10 of the report. In summary, these will strengthen those policies. They'll require climate change impact assessments, and that proposals need to take into account indirect emissions associated with the use of coal and hydrocarbons. Policy does not support proposals for coal extraction for electricity generation. Fracking is a difficult one. Current government position is that government says it will only support fracking proposals where the science shows that this can be done safely. It's generally considered that that science isn't there yet, so in effect, there can be no real fracking proposals going forward at this point in time. On the other hand, the national planning policy, which local plans need to be in accordance with, still identifies oil and gas as important minerals and requires plans to set a steady and adequate supply. So the minerals plan itself sets out a cautious approach which reflects those two positions, and particularly where proposals will need to show that there are no unacceptable impacts on local amenity, health well-being and safety, where a proposal, and also, sorry, includes a buffer zone where proposals would be 500 metres or less away from sensitive receptors. And certainly that latter issue was something that was raised by a number of the objectors as something that they were looking for. What is being sought now is authority to publish the plan. That's a specific stage in the preparation process. It's technically speaking, it's not a draft, though there is a consultation on it, but it is what the authorities consider to be the final plan. But that, as I say, there will be a consultation on it for about 8 weeks, and following that, authority is sought to submit that document then to the Secretary of State for a formal examination. It's possible that the county and ourselves will want to take the results of that consultation back to Cabinet later on this year, depending on just what is raised. Hoping that there will be a decision by the end of this year, which would allow us to move to the examination end of this year, beginning of next year, and formal adoption in late next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that. Obviously, I want comments on this, but I would guess, unless I'm badly mistaken, but this affects mainly Derbyshire rather than the actual city.
You're absolutely right, Chair. This probably will have little to no impact on the city itself.
Well, that's what I'm thinking of. So what I'm wanting members to do, and I'm looking at certain members particularly on this, I don't, wide-ranging debate about issues that we have little influence over as local councillors, and I'm not being flippant here. I'm saying it's important that if we do have views outside this meeting, that we feed them into the process. But otherwise, we're here to represent our constituents and things that affect people in the city, not in High Peak or in Glossop or somewhere else in the county. I just had that rider because we have got a long agenda. Thank you very much, and open to members. Lucy.
I just wanted a very brief comment about secondary aggregates, because that's, I think, where we get from the city. When we demolish something, we produce a secondary aggregate. And whether there's any comments about that within this that maybe we should be more cognizant of or more alert towards. Thank you,
Lucy, for being succinct. Thank you.
Okay, I have to admit, Chair, I have no idea about secondary aggregates. That's something I can find out and pass on to you, Lucy. It's better than I may try and make a guess as to what it is.
I think that's great. Thank you very much. So outside the meeting, pass on to Lucy. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 13, community managed libraries reviews. Who's taking us through this? Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, thank you. You referenced before the late addendum to this report, just to reflect our latest discussion. So thank you for accepting that. Just as background to this report, so within the council's looking at the medium-term financial plan over the last 6 months or so, a real recognition that the community managed library model, which is just one specific form of running community libraries, was proven to be unsustainable financially into the longer term. And some of the impacts of COVID around that, and also the review we carried out to understand some of the usage figures, also have played a part to get into that point. And as such, the end to this model was included in the budget proposals that have been obviously out to consultation with the city. However, at the same time, the council was really clear it was open to a range of different ideas about how to maintain these really important community spaces, and a clear commitment for seeking views for how we would keep these community spaces open and to support communities in the longer term. The budget consultation thus included an expression of ideas process to ask community groups, voluntary organisations, a variety of people to suggest ideas they may have to run activities or to take over or run those libraries themselves, to understand what the interest was in the community. That consultation, as members know, ended on the 3rd of this month. And I was really positive to report to members we had a really positive response from that expression of ideas. A number of ideas came forward, some of those for individual activities, individual buildings, some of those for running all of those buildings across all of those 10 different sites. So really encouraging and a positive sign. There's real interest in our community about different ways of running these buildings and maintaining them for our community. On the basis of that high level of interest, We therefore need to move to a formal process for expressions of interest, and this report asks Cabinet to institute that formal expression of interest process, and that will clearly include assessment criteria and evaluation process to determine the viability of proposals that come forward. And as the report states, any things that come from that into a transfer of a building or running in a different way would come back for Cabinet to approve a further report. In the meantime, and to reflect the fact that these early indications are really positive about the ability for all these libraries to remain in some form or other in their communities running important activity, it's recommended that after the 31st of March, the libraries are able to continue running as in the current model. So using volunteers and the opening hours as they are now. So we've worked alongside DHA, who are our current provider of the CMLs, to work through a handover process. And we had originally thought that the idea to extend their contract to enable them to carry on doing that was the best option. But since having more conversations with DHA and looking at the various different factors, we feel the best option to maintain those provisions for a period of time while the negotiation could take place under the expression of interest process is for the council to take those buildings back into the council service and for us to work and to run them with volunteers in the same way. That would give us much more flexibility because obviously those negotiations will take place at different times for different conversations, and it may very well be transferring buildings in different timescales. So be able to do that flexibly would be very positive. So the report is really just asking members to agree. That's what we would do. We would take those services back into the council to maintain them, and then initiate the expression of interest process to really work on negotiations with community groups to make sure these libraries can stay open for the future. I'll leave it there, Chair. I know the Cabinet member is here, may want to speak about this item.
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments before I invite the Council Cabinet member to comment. I mean, one can smell the burning rubber hanging over the city following this administration's screeching U-turn. Letters went out throughout the city, spelling out quite clearly the closure dates and times for various libraries. I'd like to ask the Cabinet member who sent this letter out, why they sent it out, and why now the smell of burning rubber has been replaced by the smell of the long grass into which this has been kicked. Could you explain, Councillor, please?
Thank you, Chair. You might want to get your nose checked, if I'm honest, because I outlined very clearly in July that we had no intention to close any libraries. I came back here in November and outlined that we had no intention to close libraries. I'm unaware of the letter that you referred to because, unfortunately, yourself, like nearly every one of your Labour colleagues except from Councillor West, and like every Liberal Democrat and Reform councillor on this council, during the expression of ideas process, not one of you bothered to come and talk to me about anything to do with ideas or proposals that could help take these libraries forward. There was no advocacy to me about any of these points. So if you genuinely... Councillor, anything you don't let me say now, I'll say at Cabinet tomorrow.
Councillor, please, I ask you the question, who sent these letters out and why? And why the screeching U-turn?
Anything you don't let me say here today, Chair, I'll say at Cabinet tomorrow. I'm unaware of the letters that you referenced because no one's brought them to me. If you're referring to the schedule that was published, that was a handover schedule, not a closure schedule, was not created by this council and was a draft, not an agreed document, then I think the facts of that need to be made clear around that. If that's the document you're referring to, it was not an agreed document and it was not a council document.
So who sent it out and why?
Without you having provided it to me, Chair.
I think we... have you got copies of it, Rachel, at all? You must have. If you have, I think in terms of, look, I'm fed up with this council being so closed. I mean, like the other meeting where we're in a closed session. This is about talking about our libraries. I want to get to the bottom of where this letter came from. Do you have a copy of it, Rachel? If so, will you pass it to the Cabinet member? If you haven't, please say so.
If I try and help members understand, what I think is being referred to is an internal document produced by Direct Help and Advice, DHA, our provider, on a proposed handover schedule for the CML model to end and those libraries to come back to the council. That's what we're talking about. It was never a closure communication. It was about how they exited from their relationship. That was the intention, because clearly the budget has said that the CML model and the funding for that CML model was removed from the budget from the 31st of March. So there does seem to be a confusion about the word closure and the word
Have you seen the letter?
handover.
Have you seen the letter, Rachel?
I haven't seen it yes, I haven't seen it. No, I've heard about it. I haven't seen it, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
Councillor.
Have any of your officers seen it?
I'm quite sure they have, yes.
Yeah. Can you get a copy, please, for the Cabinet member before tomorrow night, please?
I'll see if that is possible, Chair.
And can you copy me in, please? Because I've heard about this where it's detailed. So if you could get that, please. I think it's important that we actually deal with this and put this to bed. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Now, look, Councillor Eyre, I genuinely, I am a very friendly councillor and I get on with many Tories. But I honestly have to say that I do not recall you asking me to come to you to talk about a library closure. And if I've missed that, I apologise. But I do think, I think in terms of there never being any talk of closure, what does this mean then? On the budget consultation document 4.6.11, forgive me because these glasses aren't my best, there's a point, these reductions cut across every service area, including, and there's a bullet point early help, bullet point adult social care, then there's a bullet point libraries, and it says removal of council subsidy from community managed libraries amounting to closure from the 1st of April 2023 and reconsideration as part of a council review of all community buildings. So what is that referring to? It's a genuine question if it's not closure. Thank you.
Councillor Eyre?
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't invite any councillor with me to discuss closure because I've been very clear that was not the intention that was being discussed at the time. I did send out the expression of ideas article to every councillor to ensure every councillor was aware of it. I've been very clear that there's an open door policy, as of all of my Cabinet members. The mobile number included on that is my personal mobile in case anybody wanted to reach me, and you've all got access to my email address, and the vast majority of you also know that I have an office in this council as well. If anybody wanted to reach me, they could have done. With regards to that line, I had a feeling that line was going to come up, and as Rachel have said, it amounts to the ending of the CML model as it is at present. I would encourage members to have a look further down at the specific lines around libraries where it states that in several of the specific budget lines referring to libraries, it talks about enabling wider community opportunities, locality working and asset efficiencies. That is exactly what we referenced in the looking at what the future models could be. That's where we talk about co-location, that's where we talk about the services, and where we talk about exactly what I mentioned in July, that libraries were going to need to change, there was going to need to be a new model, and we were going to have to look at the service provision from them. Thank you.
Hardiel and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think there's a lot of protestation going on here. The Cabinet members protesting that there's no intention of closing the community managed libraries. But the budget and the people out there are clearly concerned that these libraries are not going to continue. Now, some of them might do, but there's threats on a number of them. Volunteers, the schedule which is or has not been seen or not been generated by anything else from the council, is indicating volunteers losing their jobs within the DHA. Now, that's all fine if there's a plan by the council and the Conservative-led government and the Cabinet member for some alternatives. And if they were there, you'd expect to see them as proposals in the budget and the midterm budget papers. They're not. As Councillor Alison Martin has just identified, there are threats and there are budgets which are not in existence at the moment to continue the community managed libraries even in the way they were being delivered by DHA. In the 11th hour, I think, was it called soft marketing, or was it marketing, or was it invitation of interest, expressions of interest? Whatever it was, it keeps changing day by day, week by week, from the initial announcement from Councillor Eyre to explanations, deciding what it really meant. It meant, the way I read it, was desperation to find somebody to continue to help, continue to provide some provision in the buildings that are currently community managed libraries. And this paper in front of us seems to be only indicating that they will be brought back under the control of the council to either dispose of or do something without any clear positions. And Councillor Eyre is asking us now and before to come up with ideas. Where are their ideas? Why are they not in the paper? Why are they on the budget papers?
Thank you. So I'm going to make a recommendation, and it's the basic one. I'm quite happy if members agree with the general thrust to alter it around. But before I say that, I'm not sure if Councillor Eyre is either Baldrick or Blackadder with his "I have a cunning plan." We're not sure what that cunning plan is. So I would recommend that Cabinet urgently ends this worrying uncertainty and spells out very clearly which libraries could realistically stay open and how this will be achieved. Now, that's the basic one. Either I'm happy to put that forward if you're quite happy, and Hardy was nodding at that, and Hardy is a second of that. Okay, we'll go to the vote on that. Those in favour of that, please show. Great, thank you very much. Are those against? Thank you, that one's been passed. So that's that one there. Lucy, thank you very much. And thank you for the support cross-party, even if Lucy didn't support. Thank you. Okay.
I just think it's a bit,
right, Lucy, go on.
I just think it's a bit premature to know that, because ideally this opportunity for communities could have been made last summer when we knew that something was going to be happening. And I think then there wouldn't have been this feeling of panic after Christmas for communities having to come together and find themselves a way of forming themselves a community organisation that will look after the library. But I do actually think that in the long term, individual local organisations are going to be a more sustainable model than the DHA model for community managed libraries. So the direction we're going in now is good, and I'm pleased there's been a longer time frame provided. If only that had been the case 30 years ago when Little Over Library closed, because we've been without a library ever since then. Could I, though, clarify 2.1? And now I've downloaded this paper twice, both when I was originally reading them, and then again when after we'd had the email to say there'd been an update. But 2.1 still talks about DHA's ongoing involvement until the end of July 2023. Has that now actually been superseded? Yeah. We haven't got an up-to-date paper then?
Yes, the addendum revises that particular line at 2.1 to note the DHA will continue to operate the CMO libraries at the end of March.
Let me look for it again. Okay, because I actually think that's better, but when I downloaded it, after we'd been told about it, it was still saying what I've downloaded twice, at different points on my bar. But I'll have a read of the new one, thank you.
Do you want to come back with a quick one? Okay.
I just want a bit of clarification from officers, really. I mean, some of the libraries' opening hours, for example, Blakery's library, are 2 days, maybe 3 days, 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours at the most. I mean, that in itself shows that the chance of survival of such a library is really difficult, because the opening hours and the resources currently made available are not very good or accessible. So, and usage is going to be probably less likely, and probably is, based on figures you've had come back. So how many of those libraries which are currently the resourcing, even were probably not setting them up to thrive and survive, is that sort of going to have an indication on how which ones may or may not actually survive this review and this process, and this invite from other organisations to take take ownership or take residence in the buildings, which should be
Rather
announced.
look at that way. Well, let's look at that. We'll ask the Cabinet Member. Cabinet Member, do you want to come in
whoever
and
can do
respond
that.
to Councillor Dinser?
We'll have to look at what the expressions are. Though, as it references there that we're looking, if Cabinet approve this tomorrow, that we'll go out for the expression of interest procedure. We will see what comes in through the expression of interest procedure. If there are groups that are viable through the expression of interest procedure who want to take that library on and deliver it in that way, that's when, at that point, when you're looking at how many people use it, the groups, you know, at that point, we'll see what the awareness there is around things like that, what the situation is at that stage. So we'll have to see what the expression of interest procedures bring up, and we'll then be able to answer a question like that. I would love to provide an answer to that right now. I fear any answer I could easily become inaccurate depending on what the expression of interest procedure looks like.
I think Rachel, do you want to quickly come in, Rachel?
Yes, I just want to reassure members that the existing opening hours, existing arrangements are not don't preclude other opportunities coming forward from organisations to run them in different ways at different opening hours and all of those things. That's really important. The proposal we have here to take the services back in-house for at least 6 months to give us that time to do that properly, give that continuity of service in that period, that's really important. And just to reinforce, there are confusions about this in that in the budget papers there is existing funding to still support community libraries in the budget. There's always in the budget, even though we've removed in terms of the budget for the CML model, that subsidy that was provided to DHA to run the CML model, there wasn't removal of all budgets for the community libraries, so that to reassure members, there was no intention for them therefore to close, but to seek community interest. And as I've said in the report, there's been some great level of community interest from a variety of different organisations, so we should be in quite a good place to maintain those really important spaces.
Hopefully tomorrow night we'll get some clarity. Okay, I think we've exhausted that for tonight, but this is part one. Part two is tomorrow night. Thank you very much for contributions on that. Moving on to item 14, and this is the South Derbyshire Growth Zone. Who's taking this?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah. This relates to the new A50 junction and link road, of which hopefully members will be well aware by now. Reports have been brought to Cabinet before. So suffice it to say, the project was awarded £50 million, only £50 million from the first round of levelling up, towards a total project cost of £55.6 million, with the remainder to come from the private sector, £6 million. In terms of the recommendations, so the first one is to note progress towards delivery of the wider South Derby Growth Zone Infinity Garden Village. In this case, specifically work on the business case, submission for the junction and link road, procurement, land assembly, risk sharing, and the overall funding package. The second recommendation is to accept the Council's responsibilities in relation to 2 collaboration agreements, and also in terms of the risk profile and the objectives. So there are 2, one between the public sector partners, just as a reminder, that's the City Council, Derbyshire County Council and South Derbyshire District Council, and the second agreement between the public and the private sector partners, noting that approval to enter into those agreements has already been delegated by Cabinet on the 13th of April last year. The third recommendation is to delegate the Council's use of CPO powers and highways powers within its administrative boundaries to the County Council as project lead to enable them to acquire the land required for the highways works. And the last recommendation is around the transfer of grant funding from the City Council to the County Council of up to 700,000 to complete the business case, that funding having been secured by the City Council to support the business case development. In terms of the risks, the 2 key risks as we currently see them are the first one is the risk of clawback, potential risk of clawback of the upfront funding. The County Council is spending in the region of £4.7 million on the upfront costs of the project. The clawback risk we envisage is minimal from that. The Department for Transport has never asked, to our knowledge, of clawback of any grants of any such projects, so we believe that that risk is minimal. And then the further risk is in terms of the cost overruns, obviously quite an expensive project to start with, noting that the risk budget and the contingency budget is in the region of £14 million, so about 25% of the project cost, so quite significant. In terms of the overruns, both the risk of overrun and the clawback provision are covered within the collaboration agreements, which will be signed hopefully subject to Cabinet approval. In terms of the overruns, so the agreement is that the public sector and the private sector would split the risk of overruns 50%, and then the public sector split would be between the county council and the city council, so 25% each. That is also further limited to 10% over and above the project cost, so £55 million cost roughly, so limited roughly to 5 million over and above that, which will be split between the public and private sector. So subject to that, the City Council's risk is limited to around 1.25 million, and that's limited by contract as well under the Midlands Highways Alliance framework. Any risk over and above that is borne by the contractor, which the County Council is in the process of procuring and should be procured by April.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any comments or observations? If not, thank you very much for that, Chris. Moving on to item 15, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report relates to the proposed procurement of a strategic development partner to work alongside the City Council in developing a number of the City Council-owned sites in the city centre. It follows a trend which is quite widespread in terms of other cities where they've secured a long-term partnership with the private sector. We're usually with a major development company, and what this will do is effectively bring alongside the city councils ever more constrained resources, additional capacity, expertise, innovation, and of course much needed financial resources as well to help us progress those sites. One of the things intrinsic to this is to start to explore some alternative investment models, where ideally what we're looking for is a partner that would have an appetite for sharing risk and reward, maybe more so than some of the other partners we've worked with in the past. The proposal within the report is that we use the Pagabo framework, which is a well-established national framework, and in the report we've also highlighted the sites which we would anticipate may become part of the exercise that we take forward with the procured partner. So the actual recommendations in the report relate to the initiation of the procurement process, seeking approval for that, and then ultimately appointment of a preferred partner on a delegated basis. Again, in the report is some sense of the timescales that this process will take, and basically you're looking at the summer is when we'd actually be in a position where we'd be saying, you know, this is the selected partner. So probably best that I leave it at that and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Comments, Lucy?
But one quick question is HS2 East status. HS2 East status. It's referred to a bit more in one of the later papers, but I read it at this point. I had absolutely no idea what it meant, and I just think a bit more background about that would be helpful. I wondered why a joint venture company as an option, pattern of option, hadn't been included for this. But I really welcome this public-private sector partnership approach. And I really understand why, in this case, led by you, David, this has come forward with the city centre agenda, because the city centre is there as a big agenda. But if we are to have a viable, vibrant city centre, we need people coming in to use it, whatever purpose it has, whether that's for creative industries, whether it's for shopping, whether it's for meals out. They need money. And at the moment, the investment that we need, which could come through a private partner investment, is actually on our housing stock, so that people aren't paying out through the nose on the cost of their heating and their lighting. And I would really have liked this to have been a public-private partnership development partner paper that was saying this is how we can get real investment to cut people's bills in their homes. And then they will have enough money to be able to have the nights out, or go out for their event, or go to this whatever it is they want to do in the city centre. And then what we want to do in the city centre would become more financially sustainable in the longer term. So,
thank you, Lucy.
HS2 East,
I'll ask David to
Joint
come...
venture company
Sorry?
and a joint venture company rather than this partnership of owners.
I'll ask David to come back and make a comment on that once he's taken Hardiel's as well. So Hardiel...
I mean, I think I welcome this report because we've often talked about wanting to be ambitious for Derby City. We want to sort of get more inward investment, and we've made a number of decisions where, you know, myself, and I'm sure the Labour Group was always on the side of ambition and better sort of facilities, investment into Derby. And I think, as the officer said, this is probably the most recent and most appropriate methodology to seek partners who are big players and can invest and can then join with us to plan opportunities for the city of Derby, which we are more and more constrained to do so because of our financial constraints and our resourcing. So to me, and having asked questions previously on this issue, this is welcome. And if this is the model that works in other areas, for other cities in and around us, we want to be on the same page. We want to take advantage. And they're starting this procurement process to find the most appropriate private partner with a public organisation like ourselves to develop and invest in Derby is a welcome thing. So I sort of...
Thanks, Hardy. But if there are no more comments, I'll ask David to comment on Lucy's points and yours, Hardy. Then we'll move on to item 16.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair, thank you. HS2 East, so this is the designation which has been given to all the stations as part of the integrated rail strategy for the East Midlands. It's actually the North and the Midlands, but obviously there's an East Midlands part of that. The stations that the HS2 trains will travel to all now have HS2 East status, and what that means is they have the focus of DFT's attention in terms of future investment plans, but also most relevant to Derby is the regeneration potential around those stations, because the government wants to see HS2 as a driver for regeneration. So that's the HS2 status. I take the point around the joint venture. What we are deliberately not doing here is predetermining what the exact nature of that relationship will be, the investment model with the City Council. We actually want to explore the alternatives with either the prospective partners or ultimately the selected partner, because we need to have a model which genuinely gets that balance between co-investment with the council, but also balancing the risk with the City Council as well. That there has to be a more balanced relationship on those issues. Completely accept the vibrancy point, the spend power point, all of those. The one thing we definitely want to see in the city centre is a more primary drivers of footfall. We are currently, as you know, constructing the performance venue. That'll be one of those. The market hall will as well, but we need more of them. The good old days of the big department stores, and that was the reason why someone came into town. A lot of that has declined. We need to find alternatives. More people living in the city centre, of course, will also help, and that's another agenda we're pursuing. In terms of the points around the kind of interest from the private sector, sort of going back to Hardiel's points, our informal market testing, soft market testing, if you like, with prospective partners was very, very positive. They see Derby as a huge opportunity. They see the economy here, but they also see the city centre as largely untouched territory in regeneration terms. What I would point out is this is not a risk-free process. There will be an element of risk that the council will have to still bear going forwards. And also, it isn't a magic wand to solve the viability challenge. All locations in the UK outside of London, commercial viability is still a challenge. But I think we've got much more chance of overcoming that and maintaining that regeneration momentum by getting a partner with substantial resources and expertise alongside us. Thank you.
Yeah, if the likes of Amazon et al. Paid their proper taxes, we could lead to greater investment in all towns and cities, hopefully lower rates and business rates, and lead to more niche spending. I would hope that's where most of us would want us to actually go, but it's getting there, and it's having a government that has the foresight to see us there. Thank you very much for that, David. Moving on to item 16, middle in-house acquisition support. Is that you again, David, or is that Rachel?
It is. It's
Thank
me.
you.
So this report relates to the City Council supporting London and Continental Railways in the acquisition of Midland House. Most of you will know that this is a very substantial landmark building right next to the station. It was historically, I think it was built in about 1872. It was historically the offices of the Midland Railway, so it's a key part of our rail heritage. And also, it's a critical part of that wider jigsaw of the regeneration of that side of the station. We were in dialogue with Located, which is a public sector organisation, who were acting on behalf of DLUC, who currently own Midland House, and they were aiming to put this on the market in the summer of last year. And we'd already got a dialogue with London and Continental Railways, who are the property stroke development arm of DFT. So they're a public body as well. And we managed to get a conversation going between London and Continental Railways and Located, and basically managed to put together this deal whereby that asset will transfer within the public sector from DLUC, who currently own the asset, to London and Continental Railways. And London and Continental Railways will be working with the City Council going forwards on a wider regeneration master plan for that city side of the station area. And that work will be funded, as it says in the report, by a combination of the HS2 growth strategy, which links to the HS2 East status, and also London and Continental Railways, so not funded by the City Council. And this report is recommending or seeking approval for a loan that we'd make, a capital loan to London and Continental Railways to assist them in this acquisition. The source of funding is the non-ring-fenced right to buy receipts, which can legitimately be used for not just housing but regeneration projects as well. And it is really important that it's noted that this is not for an open-ended period of time. So there'll be two triggers for the repayment of the loan back to the council. One is the disposal by London and Continental Railways of Midland House, which they ultimately will do as part of the redevelopment plans, or the 31st of March 2028, whichever comes first. The subsidy control is something, again, that's highlighted here. We believe that's low risk because this is public sector to public sector, and it's a relatively small intervention compared to the overall investment that will be made in this part of the city. And we're now progressing a draft funding agreement with LCR, and the intention is for LCR to progress with that acquisition later this month or early next month. And the LCR board have already approved the acquisition. And finally, there is security for Derby City Council in terms of its contribution through. There will be a restriction on the title, which means that LCR cannot dispose of this asset without our consent. So that's effectively kind of capping off, if you like, any risk from a Derby City Council perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's just hope that the Great British Railways bid is successful. The government sees sense that it would obviously need and deserve to be here in Derby because of the concentration of rail industries in this part of the country. Let's just hope that that news comes through and that news is good, because I think that'll be good news for the country and good news for the city. Alison, and then Hardiel, and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this initiative. Midland House is a wonderful building in a very historic and significant part of the city, which, as David has said, more than merits regeneration and could become a real gem in the city. And I'm pleased that the Council and LCR will have this role in this process that isn't straightforwardly left to some private sector development. And I very much hope that the outcome of this is that we do see something wonderful and it is integrated into something that's appropriate for that area, because obviously it's so important for Derby's history. So thank you.
Hardiel, and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Again, totally support this paper in terms of helping acquisition support to Midland House. The railway station is the first gateway, one of many, into the city. and at the moment it needs regenerating. And if this acquisition, assistance in this acquisition can help towards that, and as you say, Chair, the heritage of the rail industry, and to enhance that or bring it back to its former glory, it would be a really positive step. So really support this, and I hope that, and then the condition that you outline at the end is really critical, that if London Continental Railways acquire this with our help, they cannot sell it without our consent or dispose of it in a way which would be detrimental to the ambitions of this paper and of Derby.
Yes, I think we're all railway children in here. I'm sure one way or another we've all got connections. I have. My granddad was a train driver. My dad used to build the carriages. My grandma used to work in offices. So we are a railway town. So let's hope that this bid's successful, and I support this. Lucy, over to you.
This seems to be on the cusp between being a treasury management use of £500,000 and a loan. And I just wondered how it fitted. Does the treasury management policies have any implication on this?
Thank you. Obviously, when we identify loans, and this is, as David says, quite unusual, public to public, we make sure that the appropriate safeguards are in place. But its primary objective is to unlock a regeneration opportunity, and that's absolutely consistent with our treasury management policy. But the appropriate security is there, so I think it's been a creative marrying of interests and financing to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, thanks very much for that, David. And we're moving on to item 17. Simon, over to you, the medium-term financial plan.
Thank you. So members will be quite aware that the budget process rolls forward from a budget issued for consultation in December. Consultation, both public consultation and with interested groups. And then the Cabinet consider that consultation and bring forward a budget that they consider at their Cabinet meeting, and subject to the approval at that meeting, that then goes forward as the proposed budget requirements at Budget Council at the end of February. So the consultation had a number of key messages in it. There was a general consultation and then some specific consultations on some of the adult social care proposals and OT proposals. The consultation, as you can see, it's in Appendix 9, picked up various themes that either got a response. Some, I think, was a group-type response, for example, like museums. And also, as has been mentioned earlier, there was quite a lot of interest in community managed libraries. So if you look at the word cloud, that is what has come out. So I do encourage you to look at that, and especially in preparation for Council at the end of the month, to see how the proposals resonate with that consultation. But the Cabinet considered that, and you can see in paragraph 4.3.3 there's a table which effectively summarises the changes to the budget requirement that the Cabinet are being asked to review and approve hopefully tomorrow night. You can see there is money into areas which maybe has already been discussed tonight, so community managed libraries, locality working. There's some money for the Christmas offer, and I won't go through them all because in paragraph 4.3.4 it gives a tiny bit of context there. So where has that come from? Well, the government, when it announced its settlement in December, identified 624,000 of additional funding. That wasn't in that budget report. You'll remember me saying that on the 21st of December. And then when they issued their final settlement, which again was the day after submitting this paper, or the day before submitting this paper, they identified a further 92,000. So overall, there's about 700,000 of additional government funding that the Cabinet could consider where that is being targeted for. And then we also looked at our collection fund, which is a collection of council tax and business rates, and identified there was the opportunity for up to 250,000 of one-off expenditure that could be funded, and again, that's in the table. So overall, the budget remains on firm principles of it's a balanced budget with no use of reserves to balance the budget. The reserves position, as we've said on quite a few occasions, is 2020-22-23 did provide an economic shock to the public sector across the country, inflation, cost of living, energy, and therefore our level of reserves remains at a very low level, given the call that we think we're going to have to be making in 22-23. And just, I'll come on to that in a minute. So it was very important that it was a balanced budget with no use of reserves, and I think the report again has concentrated on that as a fundamental principle in setting the budget. In considering the budget, both in terms of Cabinet tomorrow night and Council, I do produce a Section 25 statement, which is effectively a requirement from myself as your Chief Finance Officer to detail the level of reserves and adequacy. That's in Appendix 7, and I summarise that in paragraph 11.2. So fundamentally, that says I am satisfied that the robustness of estimates allow us to set this budget, and that there is an assessment of the level of reserves which is required to be retained. That's detailed in Appendix 7. But as I've said, the shock in this year has taken us closer to that minimum level of reserves than we have been in previous years, and therefore the budget strategy encourages replenishment of reserves over the period of the medium-term financial plan. And in that paragraph 11.2, I quite clearly state effectively some of the conditions I think the Council needs to do in going forward, which is about spending review panels, it's about that replenishment of reserves. Just in there, it does say projected overspend in 23-24, that should say 22-23, because obviously it relates to the year that we are in at the moment, so apologies for that oversight in the final review of this. And finally, we also have taken the opportunity to look at the Council plan. You remember we approved the Council plan in February with the 4 themes of vibrant, green, resilient and growth Derby. And there's a few changes to the Council plan which is detailed in Appendix 18. Normally, you just ask a number of questions here for clarity, but there's the chance at Budget Council for further debate, as you are all aware, on the 27th of February. So bring your sleeping bags. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, 131 pages. There's plenty of opportunity for our different groups and individuals to digest and raise at future meetings, primarily the Cabinet meeting tomorrow night and the budget meeting, the Council budget meeting in particular. You'll see on recommendations the outcomes of the Executive Scrutiny Board on the 16th of January, detailed in Appendix 12 and associated recommendations. That's contained within that. So over and above that and those opportunities, anything anybody wishes to raise at this stage or hold their fire until the budget meetings? Lucy?
Two points. Firstly, the summary paragraph 433 says that the full reversal of weed control saving. Do you actually know what that is, or shall I ask somebody else about it?
I do know what it is. It's you're aware that we have quad bikes of weed killers going around. The original proposal, when it was revisited, would have meant that that service would have shrunk significantly, probably disproportionately, and therefore this reinstates the ability, I think it's for 2 quad bikes, to operate around the city on a frequency of weed killing, and that was felt to be important for the public realm, street scene, and Deptford Council. So effectively it's ensuring continuation of two people on bikes killing weeds.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay, and the second point is 1.5.2, which I'm sorry, I've got to go back to, I can't click this thing, which is the mainstream schools additional grant, which says school level allocations of this grant will be published in May 2023. Maintained schools and academies will receive this funding from April. How can they receive it in April if we're not going to know what it is until May?
Simon?
I think you pick up quite rightly the chaos that sometimes announcement is made and process follows. So this is effectively money that they gave towards schools, £2 million. Some went towards high needs, some went towards schools. I think we will wait to see when it comes and we'll give allocations to schools. But you're aware that most of the funding for schools goes to academy through the ESFA routes. So I think it's probably factually correct at the time of writing, but these announcements often have to have policy follow them. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, moving on from that, moving on to item 18, Treasury Management and Investment Strategy. Simon, it's you again.
Right. I'll keep it quite short here. The Treasury Management Strategy, as I've said in the Audit Committee and I've said here, is really important that you consider. It's about how we manage our investments and borrowing, and it's also how we secure that security, return and liquidity balance in respect of any cash transactions that we have as a council. So it is important that you read it, but I suppose for comfort I can give you, because all of you would have been in the council in February, there are no substantive changes to the Treasury Management Strategy that you approved in February. So I ask you to refresh yourself, but I don't think it's necessary to take you through it, which I'm sure you're eternally grateful.
Thank you, Simon. I think it's quite straightforward. Lucy.
The, another table on this one, table 2 at 4.19, has lots of numbers in it saying what we're forecasting to be wanting to borrow in the future. It seems a strange time to me to be wanting to borrow when interest rates are higher than they have been. But it's obviously where we are with ambition, wanting to grow at the same time as interest rates. But what I think I find really useful on here is to know what the additional cost to service the borrowing would be, and to put that as an additional line on the table. It might be there, but what is the revenue cost of this borrowing?
Simon, could you help us, please?
Councillor Kerr raises a good question. It is in here, but it's a very formulaic way of presenting it, and it's also reflected in the budget report we've just been. In terms of the timing, I think I just have to highlight that we have not had to borrow since 2008 because we've used internal investments effectively to negate more expensive borrowing. And that's what is shown here is the capital financing requirement as opposed to the overall level of debt. A year ago, if I've got to be honest, I didn't think interest rates would be up at where they are because of the economic shock that we faced as a country and the market reaction to some of the proposals that happened. We will seek to minimise debt at the sort of 4% or whatever, which it is at the moment, because I do think it will go down. I think interest rates will go down. I think inflation will go down. So, for example, we have a very short-term need to fund the council in, say, the last 2 weeks of March. We are doing a temporary inter-authority borrowing just for a short period of time to stop us securing a longer-term public works loan board. That is with a very trusted partner, not many miles from here, who has surplus cash they wish to sort of put on the market. We have a short-term need of maybe 2 lots of £5 million, just to, because government grants won't come until April. So that is not entering into long-term, more expensive borrowing. But yes, we are now moving from being a net investor into a net borrower. But 12 years of not having to pay for the borrowing linked to the capital programme obviously has helped you, whatever political colour and administrations you've been, to actually sort of support the budget over the past, 15 years. So it's been well managed both before me, and it will be well managed in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, moving on to item 19, Q3 financial monitoring. Simon again.
Okay, thank you for this. So the Q3 financial monitoring, I think when you have a look at the pressures facing local government, continued pressures of energy, continued pressures of demand, cost of living, I think the fact that our Q3 projection shows a 1.5 million improvement, so down from about 12.8 million forecast overspend to 11.3 million, shows the efforts and shows the success of the efforts that we are doing in terms of controlling cost, managing demand and everything else. So The headline message is that at Q3 we forecast overspend is 11.308 million. I'd expect that to go down a bit by the end of the financial year, as people maybe are still a bit optimistic about what they can spend in the last quarter. But let's be absolutely frank, it's not going to go down and create an underspend because of the sheer pressures that has faced us. The report details some other, I think, improving news. Our delivery savings is now forecast to be over 10 million against a target of 13 million. Again, you look at that again in the context of the year that we're in, and that's a good level of delivery. The capital budget, we expect to spend 148 million against a budget of 195 million. Again, improved performance. And council tax and business rate collection is over 79% at the end of December. So there's a lot of positive metrics in the budget monitoring report that I've just picked out. But having said that, the sheer juggernaut of pressures facing us, and we've got to realise that pressures face us in a number of ways. Things like energy, which is very externally imposed. Things like buying services and social care, where some of our providers will be factoring in the cost of increasing of the national living wage and the energy costs they're facing. So we're seeing this. And we're also seeing pay awards, as you know, that the pay award here was in excess of 5%, and the pay request next year is again substantial from the unions, which will go into the national negotiations. So this council will have to continue, as it has done for the past 18 months, to really be looking at every penny it spends, trying to establish the value for money for it, having controls, promoting accountability, promoting financial management. There are a couple of areas that the report highlights probably of increasing concern. One is the dedicated schools grant overspend of 5.5 million at the end of this financial year. And the budget report talks about that going up in the next financial year, primarily to link to high needs children with special educational needs. So that's an area that we are focusing a lot of attention to try and mitigate and manage that. And the report also details, and it's in the private part of the agenda, write-offs of 301,000 of business rates and 43,000 of housing benefit overpayments. But overall, if I was to summarise this report, I think it does show that against a difficult context, the council is actively managing its budget, and hopefully at the end of the year, that overspend, headline overspend of 11.3 million, may come down a bit, but we'll wait to see at the end of the financial year what the end position is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, if there's no comments on that, oh, John, a quick one then.
Just very quickly, Simon, you mentioned the high needs, but the DSG increasing presumably every year. And I know we're not in as bad a position as some councils who are hundreds of millions overdrawn. But where is this going? I mean, we can't keep overspending. Not just us, all local authorities. Presumably, government are being consulted on this, and there's some end in sight.
Simon?
Councillor Whitby actually raises this important point. This isn't necessarily bad management by any council, it's an underfunding of the SEN reforms that were introduced in 2014. That the funding did not keep up with the requirements, legal requirements for the council to support children with special educational needs. Nationally, there's definitely an increase of probably 14 to 20% in the numbers and costs of special ECHPs, which is the Education Healthcare Plan. And if we don't do anything, the trajectory of where we would have been, say, 3 years ago, of spending about 40 to 50 million on children with special educational needs will go up literally 10 million, 10 million, 10 million. And where does it stop? The government has introduced a safety valve process where councils of concern can get some support from the government, but it's very tied into a series of interventions to try and reduce the cost. We are not on the safety valve programme at the moment, but next year in the budget, our net deficit goes up from 5.5 million to 19 million, and that's in the budget report. So unless the government comes and steps in and says either the obligations you have, which seems to be the wrong approach, or the funding that will give you is sufficient, it does appear that the whole SEN system is just blowing up and up and up and up. What we've done is we employed a consultancy called Empower about 18 months ago to work with us about introducing interventions that could be graduated response. So that's about the right setting, right place. A child isn't necessarily in one setting all the time, an intervention tool and a Derby send advice line. Amazingly, well not amazingly, but they do have an impact, because either it gives more confidence to people that their concerns are being heard, it allows you to use a common tool to manage a child's pathway through that, and it also allows us to look at what provision we need to meet the need. Because one concern we have is the number of children who currently have to be taken out of the city for their needs, sometimes in very long taxi rides, which is why, for example, the administration brought forward the proposals at St Clair's, I think in December, around increasing provision, and there'll be further reports on how the SEND capital programme will be utilised. But yes, it's a system that is fundamentally broken, but it was broken back in 2014. It's not.
We haven't discussed this before. We have passed recommendations, John, if you remember, where we asked Cabinet to get an urgent meeting with senior government ministers and others, along with other councils who are in the same boat. Because unless there's a change to that funding policy nationally, us and other councils will be pushed over the edge. We have debated that before, and rightly so. We have made recommendations, rightly so, but now we need action. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 20, compliance with contract and financial procedures rules. Simon.
Okay, thank you for that. So there was the original report, and then there's been an addendum. So the original report, I'm sure you'd all support. This is giving approval to bid for 475,000 to the Safer Roads Fund to focus on collisions. So prevention of collisions as opposed to causing collisions. And again, that I think is quite important, because the number of accidents, the number of sort of crashes, anything to mitigate that and to get government money to support us in that is really important. The other one, and it's on the addendum that was issued by Democratic Services today, and it's only come today because of the timing of when we got confirmation, is the government wants us to be one of 5 place pilots. That's quite difficult to say, which is aims to pilot a place-based approach to strategic asset management. So the government has had an initiative called One Public Estate about saying, how can all the various owners of assets, whether it be health, whether it be probation, whether it be anyone else, Ministry of Justice, ourselves, make the best use of assets. But that's almost been a bit, well, tap into it when you want, don't here. This is taking that holistic approach to say, in Derby, we got a number of public sector bodies, all with assets. Can we take a more strategic, holistic approach? And we've got an indicative bid amount of $500,000 that we can apply for. And I think if you look at the budget report, it talks a lot about asset rationalisation, about locality joining up and everything else. So I do think that's a very attractive thing to have been chosen as a place pilot. And if we get that funding, it will probably it will make a major impact in the city, not just for the council going forward. So those are the 2 items on the Financial Matters report. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Lucy.
Firstly, the preventing collisions funding, which part of the A52? Do we know if it's the A52 Ashbourne Road or the A52 towards Nottingham?
Rachel?
As far as I can remember, it's around the Nottingham side of the A52. I would just state that the Department of Transport have insisted on where it is spent and where it is the money is used for. They haven't given us the flexibility to use it where we think is the most important place in our city around collisions. It is very specifically targeted at a particular place. So we are taking it and doing it because it's new money, but it isn't necessarily our number 1 priority for the place where most collisions take place.
Isn't it, that
that's
civil
fine.
servants in London seem to know better where to spend that money. You know, they've never been to Derby than we do here. But this is the problem, isn't it? This is what Andy Burnham said as Mayor of Manchester about the powers that they want to see for the North and the Midlands, where, you know, civil servants, some spotty-faced 21-year-old civil servant who lives in Brighton, travels up to London and makes a decision about where Rachel should spend money, hasn't got a bloody clue about it. But that's just my frustration. OK, thank you very much for that, Simon. Lucy, very quickly, because we need to move on. I need to get to football match.
Thank you for that. I thought we might know where it was going. The second point, this place pilot, I also think is really good to have that joined up situation. But I do have a concern, Chair, that it will lead to us as councillors not actually knowing as much as we do now, or not being able to have the opportunity to know more about what is actually happening in our wards. Because it will mean that, you know, that piece of property which is currently a health thing or is a something else thing may move around, but it's also public sector. And we are the local representatives of the public here in our wards. So I've got a recommendation, Chair, to ask Cabinet to ensure that local members are included in discussions about proposals affecting property within their wards as part of the One Public Estate Place pilot.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. That's quite reasonable. Disagree with that. I'll second that then. Those in favour, please show. Yeah, I think we're all in favour of that. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Moving on to item 21, the final one. Quarter 3 performance. Simon.
Thank you. I've been asked by our colleagues in Policy, Insight and Communication to report on this. So just in respect of it, it's again some good delivery that we've got. So of the measures where quarterly targets have been set and are being monitored, 78% had met or exceeded the target, which is a 7% rise from quarter 2. Based on the quarter 3 outturn, 68% of measures are forecast to achieve annual targets at the end of March, and 84% of priority milestones and actions were assessed on track or completed, a 5% increase from the end of quarter 2. So we've maintained our traction of delivery against the corporate delivery plan and our performance indicators. 65% of the priority measures being monitored as part of the council plan were assessed at the end of December as either green or amber green, following targeted assurance reviews on progress and delivery confidence assessments. And at the end of December, we had 16 strategic risks, of which between quarter 2 and quarter 3, we'd closed one strategic risk, which was the pay claim relating to the 22-23 pay offer. So Cabinet are asked to approve the key changes to the performance framework set out in paragraph 4.5, and which include 1 change in measure description, 8 new amended targets, and 9 actions measures to be removed. Areas of key achievements are presented in paragraphs 4.9 and 4.10, which includes a continued focus on income generation, supporting new businesses and jobs, improving quality of homes and number of affordable new homes available in the city, and supporting our vulnerable residents to remain independent in their own home through targeted work. So that's really encouraging. Supporting young people into employment, educational training alongside our adult learners, gaining positive outcomes, and really another thing to celebrate. And working across the partnership with Community Action Derby to respond where we can to the cost of living crisis. We've also launched our councillor portal, and we've reduced our risk for ineffective contract management as a part of the targeted work in the Working Smarter programme. But there does remain, and I think as with any big organisation, there remains a number of areas of ongoing risk, which includes continued challenges on sufficiency of accommodation, impacting a number of services, such as homelessness prevention, adult and children's social care, and that's a real issue being faced in the city and elsewhere. Colleague sickness absence, which has gone up, and we've recently done a deep dive review into that to try and identify how we can turn that curve. It hasn't gone up significantly, but we want to try and manage it proactively. And there's been a rise in the risk rating for accommodations for victims of domestic abuse. And this has been reviewed and redefined to include male victims as well. So overall, there are no performance measures or risks recommended for surgery, and Cabinet are going to be asked to note the latest performance position and note the in-year quarter activities set out in paragraph 4.16 and 4.17. So hopefully that gives you a context of it. I'm happy to take questions back to Heather and Sarah, or try and answer them with the knowledge that, say, Rachel and myself have in our directorates, if relevant. Thank you.
So it's basically for 3 notings and 1 to approve. Lucy, Alison and then Lucy. Sorry, I'm mixing you up. I should never do.
Thank you, Simon. This may be something or nothing, because I'm not aware of any of this before. You're just recounting it now. But the facility for victims of male victims of abuse, will that be a separate facility to the ones for women?
Rachel?
As far as I'm aware, it would be, but probably better rather than me to speculate, I'll get the officer who's involved to give you a bit fuller information. Councillor Martin.
I'm sorry, Rachel, could you, I didn't catch that last bit.
Oh, sorry, so I could speculate. I think it is going to be separate. I think that's part of the proposals to maintain sort of safety for people, but I can ask the officer involved to give you a more detailed summary of the information.
Yes, please, because I do think that's an extremely important point. Thank you.
Okay, it was Lucy and then Hardiel. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to go through a couple of the targets proposed for approval and amending in 4.5. And you've probably got to answer it because it's to ask how they are set. Now, the number of children with BMI above 85th centile joining the Child Weight Management Programme, annual target 300. Hopefully we have 300 places, and the reason why we have a target of 300 is we want to fill every place. But household waste recycling rate, revised annual target 38%. Well, that's not the government's target for us. It's not an aspirational target. It sounds almost as though it's just a what we're doing at the moment and we can achieve it. Proposed revised target is a more accurate reflection of anticipated outturns, i.e. it's what we can do. It's not being ambitious or pushing ourselves to do better. It's just we think we can hit this.
Hardiel, I think, wants to make a similar point, a similar issue, then I'll let you come back, Rachel. Hardiel.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, yeah, that one struck me as well, the household waste recycling on paragraph 4.5 on the table. Revised annual target of 38%. Question, Simon, you may not be able to answer it now, but you can do it. What's the revision from? Was it 48% before, or was it 28%? It'd be helpful to know that. But yeah, and I think the ambition should be to, as Lucy said, to raise our ambition, not to have a performance target which is manageable. So that's one. And the same on the bit about the cost of waste collection. It says measured milestones proposed to be deleted. Is that a reason? I think it says data development activities are required and will not be delivered by the end of 2022. But things like tonnage of waste sent to landfill is really critical. So what do we mean? Are we going to not have these measures in the future? And I think it'd be not helpful if we don't have those measures, because we need them to measure what we're doing around recycling. Thank you.
Yeah, if you can come back, Rachel, on those 2 points. The points that Hardiel and Lucy both queried, and then the cost of waste collection and the deletion. Thank you.
I think we will give you a more detailed response, but behind every bit of performance reporting, we constantly look at the data quality, which is backing it up. So, you know, for example, that we'll try and get the waste flows that go through into recycling and everything else, and some of that comes into our facilities, some goes elsewhere. And we're constantly reviewing, effectively, is the quality and validity of that data there? So this isn't saying remove permanently, it's saying, while we look at the data and the data collection methodology, we will be looking at that. But I'll get Sarah Walker to reply to those in conjunction with the people. I don't know if you want to add to that, Rachel.
All I would add to it is this revision of these targets has been based on the fact that we've taken an MTFP through. Council obviously hasn't major changes to some of our services and reducing our capacity to do certain things. So trying to reflect on that, it hasn't taken away our aspiration to set targets that are forward stretching. They're just more realistic in terms of the realities of the changes we're making in the budget process. But we get more information to members.
Thanks, Rachel. Right, okay, moving on from that, we now go to the item 22, exclusion of the press and public, to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. So over to you, Stephen. Are we all in favour of that? Yes? Okay.